Welcome to the Good and Basic Podcast, a long-form conversation with Joseph and Joseph about the videos on our channel and why we do them and lots of other stuff besides. So here we both are.
Welcome back.
You can find us on anchor.fm/goodandbasic. That's the podcast audio-only version. You can also find us on Twitter. Our handle is @goodandbasic, and on Instagram our handle is @good_and_basic. So thank you very much all for your support. We're looking forward to an awesome conversation today. Today we are talking about the Great Rye Harvest of 2019.
That title is deserved. Wow. You came up with that on the spot? That's awesome.
I did actually. Well, because it's true. This isn't the first rye harvest we've done.
No.
But it was of a much greater scale, right? We had and we're going to get a ton more grain from this.
Yes.
Basically, we did the same thing as last year, but bigger and better in every possible way.
Yep. We brought a trailer instead of a tarp for gathering the grain. So we went to a empty lot that is full of weeds. One particular weed that it happens to have a lot of is wild cereal rye. Crazy thing about rye is that it is comparatively among the grains easier to thresh. That's a blessing and a curse. In terms of threshing, it's a blessing, but it makes the window where you harvest it a little bit more odd because it will self-thresh, meaning it will drop its seeds on the ground and not let you eat them. And so,
which would be unfortunate. That's not the idea.
That's not the idea. And because of this trait, it escapes. It's also a very hardy plant. It's able to survive and thrive in a lot of places where wheat is more picky. And so it has become an endemic weed out here in the West. I've seen it all the way through Utah from top to bottom and through most of Idaho. And so
I was out walking today and I found some more clumps of it just in a suburban neighborhood. It's crazy. It grows everywhere.
Yeah. When I discovered I could eat the stuff, I was so excited I couldn't even stand it. I used to go on walks with my daughter, and she'd be in the stroller behind, and I'm kind of walking along, and I would take a snack, grab a couple of ears of the grain, rub them between my palms, and then eat the kernels, because that's the thing you can do.
So that's the first thing that I would say I noticed this year more than I noticed last year is the fact that harvesting grains like this is wildly inefficient.
Yeah.
Right. You said particularly for the rye because the heads tend to fall out, right? Or not the heads, the seeds tend to fall out of the heads. But in some sense, it's incredibly inefficient, right? Because you're harvesting this massive stalk, and you only want the head of the stalk, and you don't even want the head of the stalk. You only want the grains that are in the head of the stalk, and not only is that the part you want, but that's also the part that's falling out already.
Yep.
Right. And so it's
depending
just
on when you harvest. I mean, if you harvest a little earlier, they stick better.
Yeah, I mean, very fair, right? But it's an inherent risk, right? And so that was one of the things that I was struck by is how, so is it efficient? Clearly, because Western civilization has survived on grains for the last couple thousand years. So clearly whatever we're doing, it's working roughly.
Yeah.
Right? But I was surprised by how inefficient it was in some sense, how much...
Wasteful.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
I'm going meta on that. The fact that we have abandoned fields all over the place that are growing food and no one is harvesting it, that's the part that blows my mind. I mean, I did a little back of the envelope math years ago. I can't remember any of the numbers, but if you imagine, 10 to 20 feet of shoulder on the side of a road, on the side of I-15, and that's just running a straight shot through Idaho and Utah, going down south further than that, and then you imagine on either side of the road and this little median all full of cereal rye, and then calculate up the area that is along its length. That is a massive amount of food that no one but the birds is eating.
Yeah.
Well,
and the other thing it made me really appreciate is growing up, my parents had 45-pound buckets of wheat in the basement, right? So you open a 45-pound bucket of wheat, and I don't know how many grain kernels are in there. There's 1 million grain kernels in there, right? And now I'm just thinking about how much time that would take to harvest and thresh by hand, and I'm thinking, that sounds awful.
So we filmed the video where we harvested it. We also had an Alex Steele homage video making a sickle to test for the thing, but you've gone ahead and test threshed
just
some
a little
of the material.
bit, just a little. Yeah, is this the part where I talk about that?
Do you want to tease that?
Yeah, so the number one... so this is the big question, right, is now we have a giant trailer full of grain, and it's like, cool story, bro, but you can't eat a trailer full of hey, is
Especially
fundamentally
since
what
it's
it is right now.
90% useless, like you were saying.
Yeah. So so next stage is threshing, right? Separating the seeds from the grain heads. So the main thing that we wanted to try, kind of the core threshing operation. Last year we just laid it out on a tarp and beat it with a thresher, right?
Beat it with sticks.
Which was
Are you gonna
not
say
the
awful?
best. Right. I mean, it works, but it's slow and it's inefficient and so forth, right? So we're
Yeah.
just trying to ramp up the speed, ramp up the efficiency, right? And so
Even to the level of convenience would be nice.
yes, convenience would be really good. That is a good goal. So the theory is, okay, so you get a 5-gallon plastic drum, and then you take a drill, and you place some kind of metal bar into the drill as if it was a bit, right? And then at the bottom you have you arrange with baling wire or electric fence wire, some other kind of wire, basically a beater. So you turn your 5-gallon drum into a giant kitchen mixer, which actually that's another thing I want to try is threshing grain in a kitchen mixer, right?
Awesome.
Because a kitchen mixer is a thing that people have.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so you basically turn this 5-gallon bucket with the drill into a kitchen mixer, into a giant threshing kitchen mixer, and then you just pour your grain heads in and whip it up, and there you go. You beat out all the heads, and then it's just a question of the winnowing, right? Pouring it back and forth through a fan or through a breeze to separate the wheat from the chaff, as they say.
Awesome.
So how did that all go? Well, I just did a little bit. It worked well. The biggest problem was, and I've mentioned this to you already, right? That we just need to let the grain dry a little bit more. One source I read online said you should let it dry for 7 to 10 days. I don't know much about the history of threshing, and I don't know how long it would have been.
It's usually
left.
a winter chore. During the summer, you have a lot in farming. You have a lot of very time-sensitive chores.
Yeah.
And during the winter, nothing is time-sensitive.
Or at least very few things.
Very,
Far fewer
very few
things.
I mean, you have
Cut wood for fire, cook dinner.
those have to be daily, and so time-sensitive in a way. But
Yeah.
a lot of the rush, you got to get the harvest in now because now is the
Yeah.
time. There's not a lot of that, and so you lay up your harvest, you keep it in storage, you set up this massive pile of, the straw with the head still on, and you set that on top of bracken or something really spiky so the rats hopefully won't get into it. And then you have an area in a barn called a threshing floor, which has a lip called the threshold. So as you're threshing, beating everything out on the floor and adding new straw and then beating that and adding more, the grain fills up the bottom and the threshold keeps it from spilling out over into the yard.
Yeah.
Into the next room over. So you'll have this kind of big space in a barn and just beat stuff in the winter.
So how would they do the winnowing then? Sorry, we're getting just a hair off topic, but this is an interesting question. How would you do the winnowing then? Because you can't exactly hold up your barn and tip it over in the breeze.
No, you have to rake it up, sweep it up, and then...
Oh, okay, and winnow it in smaller batches.
Yes.
Hey, not too bad, right?
Not too bad at all.
So I would say it was. Well, and that's interesting because that's the same thing we did with the Hopi blue corn last year, right? We let it dry for probably a month on the stalks before we even harvested it, and then it just sat and dried and dried and dried and dried and dried in a garage for months.
And we're still taking from it.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's still
there's still
it's
grain in there.
Yeah, which is crazy.
I think that was very, very well meted out. It turned out to be exactly about a year's supply for 2 families to occasionally eat Hopi blue corn.
Yeah. If we wanted to up our intake, we'd need to
Up
our
production.
production. Yeah. That's how these things go, right? So how good was the drill thresher in the bucket? I would say pretty good. I would say not bad. I was also using a cordless drill, which is unfortunate because they tend to be a little underpowered compared to their corded relatives. So when we go do the threshing, I want you to bring a corded drill, and we'll give that a try, and I think it'll go better. I thought it was good. And I think we're going to come out of this with a ton of rye. I don't want to speculate, but we might come out of it with somewhere between 50 and 100 pounds. I don't know. These things.
Couple
I have
5-gallon
no
buckets.
idea. Yeah.
Gosh, that's exciting.
So
that'll be
cool.
one of the things that'll be really neat to see once we've threshed all of it is how much we got. And you and I were speculating earlier about how much land that we had actually harvested.
Yeah.
And right now our speculation is at about 1/6 of an acre, 1/8 of an acre, something like that.
Yeah,
eighth.
Joseph tends to highball it a little bit, and I tend to lowball it a little bit. So who knows?
Average the two.
I'm good at estimating an acre, and I'm not good at estimating any fractions of an acre. So
Well, we were
So
trying to
that's all
think
I can
like in relation to a suburban yard, which tends to be
Quarter acre, third acre.
quarter acre, third acre, and maybe
Right.
we did about half of that, maybe.
Yeah, I tend to think about 10%, and Joseph wants to go 12% to 20%, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that range. So,
Yeah.
well,
Of an acre.
something like that.
So that's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Shall we talk about the threshing methods that we have planned?
Yes.
Because we don't want to just do the 5-gallon bucket with a drill thing. We've got some other ideas. So one of them is the kitchen mixer.
Yep.
Right. That's the thing I want to try.
There's a gizmo that I really, really, really want to try making. I haven't gotten to it yet this year, and so who knows if we'll get to it in time for threshing now. But I have a Singer sewing machine treadle base that I've converted into a spinning wheel. And the idea there is that I can swap out, the thing being powered on top of the base. And I have a drum of wood, kind of a bunch of long slats attached to basically a cylinder of wood. And what I'd like to do is stud it with screw heads or nails and rig it so that it will spin. And then as you're treadling, you'll add a sheaf of the rye and it'll knock all the heads off onto a tarp.
See, so that's really interesting because one of the major problems that I ran into while I was doing the test batch of threshing is the fact that, once you've piled all that rye into the trailer, right? And we tried to orient the heads towards the center in a radial circle, right? But you just don't do a perfect job. And there's all different lengths of rye stalks, right, with the heads at different points, right?
Yep.
And so it's not easy to separate it's not easy to efficiently separate the heads from the stalks.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm very curious about that. I think that could be really helpful.
It could be. Maybe that moves higher up on the priority list. Speaking of priority list, there's a video that we didn't actually manage to get out this week about making and using a Neolithic flint sickle.
Which was wild. This was amazing. Joseph just shows up and he's like, hey, look, I made a Neolithic flint sickle, and it's this stick with obsidian obsidian or flint? With flint chunks in it, glued on with pine gum.
Yep.
Crazy.
I made the thing entirely with Stone Age tools, so rocks and sticks and things lying around that way. Carved it with rocks. That was a really interesting experience. It was the most exhausting maker project I've ever done in my life. It was so incredibly physical to try carving with flint because, you have to carve a groove in order to fit all the blades into. And basically what you do is you scratch as precisely as you can, freehanding it. And in order to do that, you're gripping this and trying to hold it really tight, which forces you into kind of this crunched up posture. And then you're working back and forth over and over and over and over, just scratching to try to get
So what
this
you're
groove.
telling me is that the Neolithic people probably had posture problems. It's not just a contemporary computer white collar type thing.
Well, considering that I was the guy trying it for the very first time, maybe they had, sneaky ways of clamping stuff down and then,
And you're probably not doing
they
it
have
all
the
day, every
benefit
day.
of experience. Yeah, the cool thing about the tool, though, is that I have the tool now. And so, I invested 2 or 3 hours making a sickle, and then now I have a sickle, and I can use that for a while.
Capital goods, man.
Yeah. I can even heat up the pine pitch and then replace the blades. So it's basically like a utility knife.
Yeah, which was the craziest thing when you told me that.
Yeah.
Right? It's a flint-bladed utility knife. I was like, what the crap is this thing? That's amazing.
One of the cool things that I learned when visiting with Larry Kinsella, who is an incredible flint napper. You can find his website at flintnapper.com, not flint nappers, but flint napper. And he also has a drastically underrated YouTube channel called Mr. Megalithics. We'll post a link in the show notes below. And he talked about how when you're making a hilted flint knife, you'd imagine that you make a custom handle for the flint knife. But that's not the order that you do it in. Making the handle is so much harder than making the blade that you end up making a bunch of blades that you'll take the time to make sure that they will fit the handle that you have. And so it turns into more of this, flint-bladed utility knife kind of philosophy.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So that was a cool thing. Footage has been giving me a lot of trouble downloading, but that should go up eventually, making the Neolithic sickle.
Fortunes of war, man. But that'll be really cool when it goes up. So, all you podcast listeners, you get the preview on that. So good job. We didn't mention another threshing thing we wanted to try, which is using a weed whacker.
Yeah.
Right? Using a string trimmer. which I tested briefly, actually. I need to, because the weed whackers tend to have this plastic guard on it, right, which
Yeah.
keeps rocks from flying up in your face, and isn't that a nice thing, right? But the plastic guard wouldn't fit very nicely in the 5-gallon bucket, so I'm going to have to remove it. But I was running a little short on time, so I just kind of crammed it in there, right, and turned it on. And I'm cautiously optimistic, man. I think the string trimmer might be able to thresh wheat, and if it does, then we've just kicked our efficiency up by orders of magnitude. This is going to be great.
There's a really funny thing there because, we've talked about the difference between scythes and string trimmers in terms of their efficiency in mowing or doing harvest. And the string trimmer leaves a lot to be desired there because it kicks up little, whenever I went weed whacking around the backyard, you have plant guts sprayed all over your face, and you have to wear eye protection and ear protection, and, it takes fuel, and, it takes you 20 minutes to get the darn thing started. But it's really funny that when you move, so maybe it's not an appropriate technology, but then as soon as you go to threshing, it instantly becomes the most appropriate technology for the moment.
Yeah.
I don't care that it makes a lot of noise. I don't care that it's going to throw bits of plant. It's going to get through this rather tedious chore so much faster that it suddenly becomes, a godsend.
Yeah, it does what you want it to.
Yeah,
right.
Better than anything else you happen to have.
Yeah. Although I am very curious about your Singer sewing machine thresher evenly, right?
Yeah.
Right, because then it's pedal powered, and wouldn't that be nice? Because then there's no gasoline. But the string trimmer, I'm hoping it will do a really good job. We'll see, right?
Yeah.
We'll see.
There's one more that I want to try, and that's to use a leaf shredder.
Yeah.
Which is basically like a micro wood chipper.
Yeah.
And we need to do some experiments to see if it won't just make flour on the way.
That's what I'm really curious about, because I think that's what's going to happen. Is I think you're going to put the grain in, and you're going to end up with a bunch of flour mixed with the chaff, and that's not going to be any good.
Yeah.
But if it works, if it can beat the heads without pulverizing the seeds, right? Grain, the grain kernels themselves, then that thing is going to be so wildly fast.
Yeah.
That thing is going to be the appropriate technology for us this year.
Speaking of appropriate technology and this connection, I want to talk briefly about threshing historically. So we've talked about how it was kind of a winter chore. You go out and you do your threshing, right? And it's this thing that can kind of wait, and then you end up doing it for several months of the year, and it's enormously time-consuming. But you have to do it in order to have bread and in order to eat, right? Because grains are the major staple of your diet. One interesting thing is that for young men roughly our age, particularly unmarried men, it was a really good source of income because threshing is awful enough that you're willing to pay other people to do it. And so you have, the labor force of willing hands who suddenly don't have a lot of chores in the winter, moving around from farm to farm doing seasonal work. And then maybe you work the farm normally and you're doing mostly subsistence stuff maybe, and you're able to get by, but that brings in an extra bit of cash that pays for, doctor's visits and all the stuff that you can't make yourself. And so that was the cash source. So when threshing machines first get introduced, they caused a huge problem. The Luddite thing, some of it was smashing looms, but a lot of it was smashing threshing machines.
Because you're putting a bunch of people out of work.
Yeah, but the bizarre thing about threshing machines is they save so much labor, and you can look at that and say, save so much labor. The cost at the time, at least the perceived cost, was, well, there goes my source of winter income, and I don't really have any other, so...
Yeah, which is a similar. Well, that's also sort of what happened with the cotton gin, right? Is when the cotton gin was invented. If I'm remembering rightly, the inventor expected that it would decrease the need for slaves in the cotton industry in the United States in the 1800s, and what it ended up doing was
making them more economical.
Yeah. So that was kind of unfortunate, I suppose. No, I was going to mention something really interesting about that, which was that means that. In a way, there was a time where people were the appropriate technology for threshing.
Best available. Gosh, with how time-consuming it is, though, I wonder, it's one of those things where it surprises me that innovations didn't come earlier. And here's why. So you're threshing, right?
Yeah.
You are continuously slamming this flail into the ground over and over and over again
It's
for a month
tedious.
or two out of the year.
It's tedious.
During that time that you're threshing, what might you be thinking about? You might be thinking about, gosh, I'd rather not be threshing. Now, if you multiply all the people who are doing this by all the hours that it's being done, you could imagine at least one of those people thinking, gosh, I'd rather not be doing this, and maybe there's another way to do it.
And then figuring out that other way to do it.
Yeah. But, I mean, that
that
goes
is interesting.
unabated for what, 3,000, 4,000 years
That's very interesting.
before mechanized threshers become a thing.
I mean, one thing I want to say is maybe if it's a social activity, you're distracted by all the people around you.
Maybe if you're singing while you do it and everybody's kind of keeping the rhythm.
Yeah.
Maybe when you were growing up, like you're 9 years old, you're not quite old enough to thresh, and then suddenly your dad says you're old enough, and you're like, I've joined the community, like
Yeah.
I've arrived.
Yeah.
And so you're not thinking about going somewhere else. You're feeling like I've made it.
Well, and there's also, I don't know how prevalent it is, right? But you can also have your cattle.
Yeah.
Right? If you happen to have livestock, you can have them walk out over the threshing
And
floor.
some mechanized stuff does happen. At what is the name? Mount Vernon, the estate of George Washington. He had a threshing barn, which was a fascinating thing. It had a turnstile on the inside where a set of cattle walked around on the top across slats. So there's slats in the floor where it can fall through. And then
See, that's real
down
smart.
to the room below. And so it was a labor-saving device that he had purchased for his farm in order to save labor in the threshing process.
It's a whole extra labor of engineering because you need to have that raised grate floor, right? But if you do that, then yeah, I can imagine that being,
a helpful
that
thing.
being really good. Yeah.
And then you just, I guess, clean up the cow poop.
I have wondered about that.
Yeah.
I have wondered about that, and I'm not sure what they do if they just. Well, I just don't know enough about livestock. Frankly, I don't know enough about handling animals. That's a gap in my knowledge, right? Can you move the animal outside temporarily, or are these things
Get it
just
to
too hard to
signal,
predict? Or
wear an oxen
exactly
diaper.
right? Yeah. Wear an ox diaper.
Again, my ignorance is showing.
Who knows, right? Who knows?
Yeah. So threshing, miserable job, but one that people fought to try to keep at the time. And that's kind of the paradigm example of the Luddite desire for things to stay the way they are. It's an interesting thing.
And another case study worth bearing in mind because we are dealing with a similar problem today with automation, artificial intelligence, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Self-driving cars, so on and so forth. These are similar questions that have been raised before,
Yeah.
right? So, well, it's always interesting to revisit those just a little bit.
It's such an interesting thing.
Which, by the way, I'm one of those people who, and I think you disagree with me on this. I'm not sure, but I think you disagree with me on this as far as I
Let's see.
remember that. Yeah, well, that like when people talk about self-driving cars destroying the economy and so forth, and artificial intelligence wrecking the economy and putting everyone out of a job, I'm like, no, are you kidding me? Human wants, if there's one thing we have learned from the last couple hundred years, it is that human wants are unlimited, right? We will pay people to give people massages, and we'll just make all the truck drivers into misuses, right? Like, I'm making a little light of the issue, obviously, right? But like, I mean, like, when you don't work at something else, you'll find something else. And if human wants and needs really are unlimited, which I think there's a good case to be made, they sure look like it, man. They sure look like it because there's all sorts of things that we enjoy now, right? Like, my taste for Brazilian grills, like that was a taste that didn't exist in Utah 200 years ago. Well, nothing exists in Utah 200 years ago, right? But it didn't exist in Europe 200 years ago, probably, right? So my belief is no. Like we've dealt with this before. Now, does that mean it won't be messy in the middle? It could very well be messy in the middle. But as far as wrecking the economy, I'm like, I need a more sophisticated argument to be made because we've dealt with very similar stuff before, and it did not wreck the economy. And again, I want to look at the other side of the issue too, right? Like that doesn't mean that there aren't severe growing pains and that people don't suffer because of that, right?
Yeah.
But I don't see it as the cataclysmic event that some people do. So do you disagree with me on that, or?
Well, yes, I think I do.
Do you want to make your pitch? I just
I'll
had
make
my
a pitch.
opportunity to make my pitch. So
from looking at history and seeing things like the Luddite Revolution and seeing examples where there have been these growing pains in the past, there are two messages. One, it's painful, and two, we've gotten over it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that
I agree with you that far.
only thresh when I want to is a really cool thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to me that when I'm very interested in independence.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in independence. That's something that gnaws at my bones. But there's a couple of different angles to look at this. People who left farming in the old school thresh with a hand thresher to the cities, roughly speaking, over the course of history, moving from the farms to the factories, and then from the factories to the office buildings. There's not just a sense of running to something better. There's also a sense of running from, like being independent from the constant tasks that you have to get done in order to keep going.
Uh-huh.
And
yeah, if you have cows, you can't go on vacation because they
No.
need to be milked twice a day.
And-
But if you have a factory job, you can go on vacation because someone else can do the factory job.
Yep. And then you can spend your money, which you get from the factory job, for your food and supplies, and then other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, at that point, you say, "Tempt me, send me ads, and maybe I'll buy some of that stuff." Mm-hmm. You have a lot of freedom to do stuff with money. Money
Yeah.
equals a certain amount of freedom. And then, of course, in order to live a life that's mostly based on money instead of producing things yourself, I mean, there are some sacrifices there, but also a lot gained. And so, I mean, that's me being positive. Me being negative. I have
Be
some...
negative, be negative, be negative.
There's a statistic, it's like 20% of the economy of the labor force is in driving. If you displace 20% at once, I think it'll be a zombie apocalypse. And then, well, not quite a zombie apocalypse, but I mean, that is a massive, massive problem. And naively saying, oh, well, they'll just get other jobs, I will say, sure, some of them will. But 20% smashing into the existing 80% is going to be hard. And in addition to that, there's the retraining required and all the rest, and then the demoralizing hit of losing the thing that was a part of your identity. And so I see that growing pain as being big enough to be, I'm not going to say existential, but, what is the thing? Just shy of existential.
So fundamentally, the case I'm putting forward is, hey, look, we've faced shocks before. And in fact, we face shocks every time you get fired from your job and you have to find a new job, right? That perhaps is slightly different from what you were doing before, right? So the case that I was laying forward is, look, individuals go through shocks like this. Economies go through shocks like this. We've seen it all before. We're going to be fine, right? And your answer is, well, yes, we go through shocks, but this one might be
Really,
too
really
big of
big.
a shock, right?
Yeah.
This might not be spraining an ankle. This might be a full body cast in the hospital for 6 months.
There's a
And
couple
even if
other
you
things.
survive that, it's still not going to be pretty.
Aesthetically speaking, and this is purely my aesthetic preferences, I do not like the idea of self-driving cars. I like driving. I enjoy that process.
Neo-Luddite.
Yeah, my Luddite is going to show right here. Another area where I strongly dislike it is I dislike centralization in general, particularly of information. I see massive privacy issues in self-driving cars, and not just privacy issues, but also security issues. If my car is able to talk to other cars, and other
You're
cars
not
can talk
wrong.
to my car, and other computers can talk to my car, then somebody who's really, really good with computers owns my car.
Well, and there's tons of people who are on edge right now about what Facebook, Twitter, Google, and or Patreon, for example, right? What a variety of online platforms are doing as far as censoring content and whatnot, right? So, what happens when that comes to the car world?
Awkward.
Right? That's going to be pretty interesting.
I like that. The thing that so there's a lot to dislike about cars. People die in them. If you're going to die as a young person, there's a very high likelihood that it will be in a car accident. I've come really, really, really close to dying in a car accident. I T-boned a car while riding my street bike, my motorcycle at 50 miles an hour. And
in Joseph's defense,
yeah.
strictly speaking, the car put itself in front of him. It was
yeah. The other driver was
so.
just didn't see me. It was perfect timing. So, I mean, I recognize that. I see that that's a bad thing. But the thing that I really love about the road system is this. You probably drive multiple times a day. And you, every time you drive, are making the calculation saying, well, knowing that there's a risk of becoming a bloody smear on the road, I think it's worth doing. And the crazy thing is, the decision making on the roads is decentralized. All of those individual agents and actors are all acting in their own self-interest, and most of the time it flows beautifully. I mean, think about how many people who want to disrupt the roads it would take in order to disrupt the roads, and yet they function. That, to me, is miraculous and cool and aesthetically beautiful.
That's the first time I've ever heard the U.S. road system described as aesthetically beautiful.
Not just the U.S.
But I don't
system,
disagree.
But
I don't
anywhere
disagree.
there are roads and that they typically work most of the time.
Yeah, it's still the first time I've heard any road system described as aesthetically beautiful.
If my chance of dying on a car ride were as high as 1 in 100, 1%, I wouldn't drive. Neither would you. The fact,
I mean, can you imagine dying on 1% of your car drives?
yeah, I'd be dead multiple times a year because
Yes,
I drive
and everyone
most
you know
days.
would be dead.
Yeah. And so, I mean, giving those numbers, I think that's a neat thing. So that's my Luddite showing in a nutshell. I think that the problem's coming. Here's the problem. That gets
No,
me
I don't
more-
totally disagree with you. I don't totally disagree with you.
While I'm being a Luddite, I may as well go
Oh,
full
gosh.
bore. Here's what I see coming in the future.
Oh, boy.
So the trend right now is that artificial intelligence is able to automate things that humans are already doing, right? And so you have two numbers, two quantities at any given time. You have the number of new jobs entering the economy as new products are developed and new entrepreneurial activities happen and new stuff coming in. 100 years ago, there weren't any programmers. Now there's programmers. Well, there was Ada Lovelace, but, she was a special case.
Yeah, well, like computer game programmers, right? Or
That's
any
a
kind of
thing now.
computer programmers,
Yeah.
right? There was no demand for that 100 years ago.
Yeah.
We will invent new things to want.
So there's the speed at which new stuff, new jobs are coming into the economy. And then there's the speed at which, the rate at which old jobs are leaving the economy.
Yeah.
And what I'm interested in is the moment when the rate at which jobs are leaving the economy exceeds the rate at which they're being produced. And or when computers are able to preempt jobs as they're coming into the economy, to do them as they're being developed. And so I see that changing over time and going, exponential.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the question becomes, if there's fewer and fewer and fewer people working, how exactly are they buying stuff? And my solution to that problem, at least a partial solution, because it works on an individual level and also on a spread out multiple people's level, is to become as independent as possible. If I did not have a mortgage, then suddenly I wouldn't have to pay money in order to cover my living expenses, my housing expense.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be covered.
Yeah.
I'd still have to pay for power, sewer, and gas and all that stuff. And I'd still have to pay for food, and I still have to pay for clothing, and I still have to pay for medical
Or
bills.
procure that food, clothing, and fuel some other
Or
way.
procure it. And so what
Right,
if...
question mark. There's more than one way to skin this metaphorical cat.
What if lawns go out of fashion? What if they stop being a given? And the same amount of time and money and water that you're putting into your lawn suddenly starts growing vegetables. Well, if you're a little bit smart about it, then suddenly a lot of your food bill goes away. Anyway,
Could you grow a chia seed lawn?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That would be so cool.
Sorry, for those of you who are listening and can't watch, I just held up my hands like, and why have we not done this yet? Like, that's a thing to try, man.
Yeah.
Can you imagine bagging
Hundreds of pounds
oh my gosh,
of chia seeds?
that's so much food.
Yeah.
That's so much food.
That is so much food.
I wonder if it makes good. Okay, sorry. This is neither here nor there. We'll come back to the chia seed lawn at some other point.
My thought is, as a participant in the economy, I need money in order to live and exist. I need it in order to cover housing. In order to have a place to sleep, I need to have money. In order to have food, I need to have money. But maybe not necessarily.
Well,
Maybe
you want to end that state of affairs, basically.
I want to end that state of affairs
Yeah.
to the extent possible. There's places where I can't get away from it. Taxes and medical bills. I can't get away from either one of those.
Just use essential oils, Joseph.
To cover all of my medical. Gosh.
I'm sorry. Okay, I don't know if that joke was in good taste. I'm legitimately not sure. Okay.
But generally speaking, if I can drop my expenses down in terms of what I need to spend money on low enough, then it doesn't take much of a job or much of a booth at a farmer's market or much of a little bit of freelance work online in order to, cover the difference.
Yeah.
And if I can get to that point, then two things happen. One, I'm safe from automation taking my job. It's no longer a relevant concern.
Well,
Except for that little portion. Except for
well,
that portion.
no,
that
not
can't be
even just.
covered.
I think it's way more complex than that.
As an
I do not
individual agent.
endorse this statement. Just for the record.
As an individual agent, I think that I've reduced the level to which it can harm me, and then on the larger.
Meanwhile, everyone in the outside world is developing lasers to kill you. I don't know, man.
Because
I don't know.
why?
Well, because you have such a nice grain field.
Well, maybe. The second thing that's interesting is if
people
enough
are never
people
short
do
of
this-
reasons to kill other people. I shouldn't say never, but you know, you look at the history of the world, we tend to be not too bad at inventing reasons to go kill people and take their stuff.
That's multiple levels down. So you're assuming that collapse has already happened and that.
Well, no, I'm not even necessarily. I'm just saying that the situation is more complex, and I don't know if total autonomy is either possible or worthwhile.
I don't think total autonomy
increasing
is possible.
I think increasing your degree of autonomy is certainly possible and certainly worthwhile.
And here's the
It's
two
it's
reasons
it's
why.
where you start hitting the asymptotic limit that I'm like, look, man, this is all too speculative. Let's just work on harvesting the rye and making our own bread and worry about the asymptote later.
I agree that full autonomy is not possible, nor even desirable. But the degree to which you become independent is the degree to which you cannot be harmed by the loss of a job or fill in the blank.
You have a phrase that
And
you've said before: the inaction of others.
I cannot be harmed. I cannot be harmed by the inaction of others.
Yeah. In other words, if they do nothing, do I get hurt by that?
Yeah.
Right. Which precludes the case where they build laser guns and come after you. 'Cause
Yes.
that's definitely them doing
Yes,
something.
that's actively that. There's a whole separate set of ways to deal
Which
with that.
which you
problem.
know then my comeback is, well, you're just constricting the qualifications, right? So that you're lowering the bar so that you can hurdle it more easily. But you know, I'm in favor of lowering the bar too, right? So
lowering
there
it
we
to a
go.
place that's realistic. The second thing is the slowing down the economy. If there's fewer people buying things, then there's less incentive on the production side, which means maybe we hit equilibrium again.
I mean, gosh, if people are harvesting
got
their own rye, like what
30%.
happens to consumer culture?
Well,
right?
you could kill Monsanto pretty easily if enough people grew their own vegetables.
Which would be pretty darn interesting.
Yeah. What you do is a lot of these very, very, very large companies operate on high volume, low margins. And then you basically create a space in the market for a lot of mid-sized and small-sized companies that have, lower volume and higher margins, and then still able to keep afloat.
Yeah.
And I mean, it would change the structure of the economy if enough people were semi-independent.
Yeah, no, very interesting things would happen. So I want to clarify, by the way, just for the sake of setting the record straight, that I am concerned about the AI revolution, right? But I do think that a lot of the arguments in favor of it are fear-mongering, not because there's not a legitimate danger there, but because that danger has not been spelled out and specified, right? So the counter case against the case that I laid out, which is what you laid out, is, well, what if the shock is too big, right? And my answer to that is, well, yeah, if the shock is too big, that could be really bad, right? But the question is, well, is the shock going to be too big? Like, do we know that? And how would we measure that? And I haven't seen anyone really effectively crunch the numbers on that yet. Mm-hmm. Instead, I just hear the fear-mongering argument. So I want to clarify, and I'm not saying fear-mongering like that there's not a legitimate fear there. I think, yes, like it's potentially very dangerous. It's just that I think, so if it's dangerous, I would like to have its nature specified more. I would like to know more about it, right? I'm not content to just say, oh, well, it could be 6 months in a full body cast for the economy, right? It's like, okay, well, yes, it could, but like, will it be? Could we answer this question rather than just speculate about it? Maybe that would be nice.
The thing about fear-mongering is that it takes a seed of some truth and then it changes the proportions and the emphasis.
Yeah, well, and it's also, I guess that's true, but I want to clarify, right? Like, because I do think the danger could be very large and real. Like, it also just sort of veils and masks its true nature and proportions, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, this is why you don't, this is why little kids are afraid of what's in the closet, because what's in the closet? Well, you don't know what's in the closet, right? It could be anything. Yeah. Right.
One of the troubles that we're having with the AI revolution is that we don't know what it's going to be like. Mm-hmm. We're making predictions like Moore's law based off of what's happened before, and
that's very
the
fair
trouble
too.
with the things that haven't happened before is they haven't happened before, which makes it harder.
But I'd still like this. I mean, we play the speculation game all the time, could we not? I would really like to see
Can
some.
we play the speculation game better and worse?
That's
and
what.
if so,
Yes,
can we play it better?
Exactly. That's my feeling. Right?
There's good speculation and there's less good
Or
speculation.
yeah, and I think that's the right way to think about it. Right, good and less good. Right, effective and less effective.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, I have a wrap up question if we're at that stage of things.
I think so.
Okay. So here's the wrap up question. In 60 seconds or less, would you recommend who should do what we did? How appropriate of a technology is it to go and harvest rye from the side of the road? What kinds of people should do this, and how should they go about doing it?
People who are interested in wild foods, people who like to do baking at home, and those who like to try crazy wild things that no one else does. So basically, yes. If they do go about doing it, then find somebody who is willing to let you use their field and or do it from a public space where you aren't going to cause disruptions. Obviously, don't go chopping down someone else's crops. Make sure that it is an abandoned field. I mean, find out who owns it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, please try it. Make sure that you identify the plants properly. I mean, be careful about it. But
I'm
I mean, I
thinking of
tried
that
it.
little outro clip we filmed with the giant purple hippo. So yeah, well, here was my thought about it: is gosh, it's hard for me to say because we're going to invest. I think. I don't know. I bet we're going to spend 10 or 20 man hours on this. I don't know, but I think I can't see us escaping that, right?
Sure.
And so I think about that. I'm like, wow, that's a lot, right? And it's uncertain how much we're going to get out of it, right? So part of the interesting thing here is I would say it still seems to me like it's a little bit of a fringe project. Now, that does not mean it doesn't have a place, right? But I would be really interested in the kinds of technologies and approaches that would amp up its efficiency just a little bit, right? And I guess I'm prematurely judging it. I'm deliberately lowballing our efficiency here, right? We haven't finished the threshing. We don't know how effective this is going to be. Maybe it's much more effective than I think it will be, right? But I'd be really interested in
Finding ways of
seeing if
making
we
it
could
accessible.
fine tune this just a little bit so that every man, woman, and child across the country or across the world could, or almost everyone could do this, and it would be a good thing. Would be effective.
That'd be really cool.
You'd be able to help feed yourself.
You've
from it.
mentioned wanting to develop a miniature combine harvester, like something lawnmower scale.
Yeah, well, because this was the thing is, that giant field, we were both staring at that thing, and we both said, a combine harvester would be a really appropriate technology right about now.
Well, the only trouble with a combine harvester, everything about it is better, except for the price tag.
Yeah.
And the fact that because of its price tag, you're worried about breaking it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
So-
you and I can't buy a combine harvester.
No, not yet.
Not yet, right? So could you do the function of a combine harvester on a smaller scale, right? That's a
And
question,
also-
like a backpack-sized device,
Yeah.
or like even a cart that you could drag behind you, or even like a lawnmower type thing, right? So that would be really interesting to see. So anyway, those are things that I'm curious in as I
To the
I
future.
meditate on the great rye harvest and the way the great rye harvest will play out in the future.
The
So
greater rye harvest.
the greater rye harvest, yes, of 2020 and beyond.
So concludes our episode of Better and More Complex.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you very much. That Neolithic sickle video should be coming out soon, and of course, we'll also be putting out videos of the threshing. Reminder, if you want to check out the podcast, anchor.fm/goodandbasic, and you can also find us on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks so much for your support, guys.
Thank you. It really means a lot to us.
Yeah, it sure does. So we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Godspeed and good luck.